Hello again and welcome to part 8A of my beginner's guide to colour genetics in budgerigars. I've needed to split this video into two parts, part A and part B. The video covers the first part of chapter 8 in the accompanying PDF guide. If you haven't seen the PDF guide, then do go across to the Shed Talk Facebook page and you will find it free to download over there. So in this particular part A, we're going to begin to explore the Yellowface mutation in budgerigars. If you're wondering why we needed a separate chapter in the PDF and a separate video that focused just on one particular variety, and that being the Yellowface. This is because when I first started producing my genetic guide and indeed the videos that accompanied it, there was still quite a lot of online discussion about how the Yellowface variety is produced, and in particularly around the dominance and recessive nature of the various Yellowface mutations. And for that reason it needed a bit of a different explanation to just purely saying this variety is dominant, this variety is recessive. And because it required a bit more explanation, I thought I'd give it a completely separate chapter and of course some separate videos. So like I say, in part 8A, we'll talk a little bit about the background to Yellowface, but focus particularly on the Yellowface Mutant 1. So, and then in part 8B, we'll focus on the other two, perhaps slightly more complicated varieties, the Yellowface Mutant 2 and the Goldenface varieties. So, let's crack up then with part 8A with Yellowface Mutant 1. As always though, if you do enjoy the videos, please don't forget to hit the like button, of course subscribe, and please do comment. Well, I suppose I would start by talking briefly about why I feel we need a separate video, and indeed in the guide a separate chapter, just to discuss the inheritance of the Yellowface Blue or Blue, depending on which way you want to talk about it, and why we couldn't just say that it's recessive, dominant or co-dominant, and run through some examples of the way that inheritance works. And this really starts a long time ago. So all three of the Yellowface varieties, and I'll talk about what those are in a second, but all three of them began to appear, they all had appeared and been identified as early as the 1930s. But back then there was some, the breeders didn't really understand about how the inheritance worked, and the way particularly the Mutant 1 variety inheritance work was sort of linked together with the way that the other two varieties. So all the Yellowface varieties were assumed to be very similar in the way the inheritance worked. Also, along with some of those early findings, those early breeding findings around the Yellowface, and discussion in various areas about what had produced the Yellowface varieties, led to, I suppose, some disagreement in the way that the Yellowface variety is controlled. What I intend to do in this video, and what I do in the chapter in my PDF guide, is look at the current evidence and some of the literature reviews around the Yellowface, and come up with what I think is the most logical explanation for the way inheritance works in the Yellowface varieties. So whilst I'm on the subject of the literature reviews, I suppose it's probably only right for me to talk about the main sources that I use to come up with those conclusions. And those main sources are on the screen now. The first one of those is Peter Bergman. Now, Peter Bergman has a website that basically looks at a whole load of literature reviews around the inheritance of colour varieties in budgerigars. Looks at that, it explains it very detailed, what his views are on that and why he's come up with those conclusions. So the first one of those is Peter Bergman, and it's an element on his website that talks about the gene function in Yellowface budgerigars, and that dates back to 1998. The second one is a book by Dr. Terry Martin, and it's a really useful book if you're interested in colour and colour genetics in parrots and parrot type birds. I would strongly suggest getting this book. It's a guide to colour mutations in genetics and parrots, and is dated 2002. Like I say, a really, really good book. And the final source that I will refer to quite a lot is Ken Gray's book, Rainbow Budgerigars and their constituent varieties. And as we know, one of the constituent varieties of the rainbow budgerigar, or if you don't know, one of the constituent varieties of the rainbow budgerigar is the Yellowface. So those are the three main sources that I will use. I will try and quote the sources as I go through it. In the guide, I go in a bit more detail and talk a little bit more about those sources, so do go over and have a look at that. There are some other sources that I will talk about, or that I've used as well, and these may or may not come up during the course of this video. But those are the three main sources. So you can see this is not just me making it up. I've done a literature review, or a review of some of the main literature, and come up with the conclusions that I'm going to show in this particular video. So let's quickly talk about the three different varieties of Yellowface budgerigar, and I'll begin by talking about the Yellowface Mutant 1, partly because you'll see that it is slightly different to the other two, and that does suggest that something else in the Yellowface Mutant 1 is going on that's slightly different to the way the colour is produced in the other two varieties. So you'll also notice here that I refer to them as Yellowface Mutant 1 and Yellowface Mutant 2, not Type 1 and Type 2. I follow the convention that's been set out for a long time, that Type 1 and Type 2 stick to the way genes are located on the chromosome. So Mutant 1 and Mutant 2 are the different mutations of a particular variety. So Yellowface Mutant 1, for this Yellowface variety, there is only one phenotype, and that shows a yellow lemon face with a blue body. One of the key features of this bird is that there's no spread of the yellow from the face into the body, so there's a clear division between the yellow in the face and the blue body, and there's no green suffusion. Of all of the three mutations of Yellowface, this one appears to have the lightest, or generally speaking, appears to have the lightest colour of yellow in the face and the clearest body. And if you look at the description of the Yellowface in the BS guide, colour guide, this is the one that most fits that description. Not to say the others don't, but this is the one that I think seems to most fit that description. So that's the Yellowface Mutant 1, one phenotype for that mutation. And moving on then to the Yellowface Mutant 2, and for this variety there are two phenotypes. So there are two distinct phenotypes for this, and they reflect its single and double factor mutation. So in both cases the face will appear a buttercup yellow, so slightly darker than the Mutant 1, However, in the single factor mutant 2, the yellow spreads significantly into the body and produces a green colour instead of green. This green differs from the standard green or the wild type green, and is sometimes referred to as a sort of seafoam green. But it can be, if you're trying to pick this out early on, it can be quite difficult to identify a single factor Yellowface mutant 2, just because of the diffusion into the body colour and the green colour of the greenish colour of the body. In the double factor variety, it still produces the buttercup yellow face, but there is normally very little or no diffusion of the yellow from the face into the body. So we get that, similar to the mutant 1, a clear distinction between the yellow and the blue of the body. So it gives us in effect a buttercup yellow face blue bird, so slightly darker face than the mutant 1. So that's the Yellowface mutant 2, and the final variation is the golden face. Once again, similar to the Yellowface mutant 2, there are two phenotypes, and here we can see that the mutant 2 golden face, two phenotypes, mutant 1 single phenotype, so there is a distinction beginning to appear here. And again, as in the Yellowface mutant 2, the two phenotypes reflect the single and double factor forms. In both cases, the face has a golden yellow colour, so it's very distinctive, a very golden yellow colour. And once again, in the single factor form, there is quite a significant diffusion of the yellow in the face into the body colour, giving a body colour similar to that of the Yellowface mutant 2. In the double factor form, then there is very little or no spread of the yellow from the face into the blue colour of the body. You'll quite often read that the diffusion is quite often more significant in both mutant 2 and the golden face after the first molt, so the first molt can tend to make the diffusion appear worse than it might do otherwise. So those are the three varieties of Yellowface. We have mutant 1, single phenotype, mutant 2, two phenotypes, and the golden face, two phenotypes. So because the mutant 1 variety stands out as being slightly different to the mutant 2 and the golden face, I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the Yellowface mutant 1. And in order to do this, we'll look at it in what I would consider to be its purest form. So therefore, with it containing no other varieties, no other mutations other than the wild type allele for the gene. So I'll put up on the screen here what the variations of that are, and clearly the first one of those is just the wild type. And you'll see here I've broken a little bit from the convention that I've used throughout the rest of the book and throughout the rest of these videos, in that I've used just a cross to represent the wild type. I think in this case it makes it slightly easier to explain. So the first one is where both allele for the for this particular gene are the wild type, and we produce a wild type, so a green, in effect a green budgerigar. The second one is where we get a wild type and one allele for the mutated Yellowface mutant 1 allele, and in that case we get in effect a green bird split for the Yellowface mutation. And finally, where we get two of the Yellowface Mutant 1 allele on the same bird, so two of them. And interestingly here, we don't get a Yellowface Blue. What we actually get is a bird that looks, in effect, like a normal blue, so a white-faced blue. I think this gives us some indication about what's going on here. And I think in the book, in my pamphlet or book around this, I talk about when is a yellowface not a yellowface. And in this case, you know, if the mutation produces, in effect, a normal blue, if it looks like a blue, then why is it not a blue? And as I say, some of that came down to those early views where people didn't understand how this particular mutation was working, and they lumped it in with the other Yellowface varieties. To see what I mean by this, let's compare the way this mutation appears to work with our current normal blue mutation. So we can see here, you know, and I've sort of split them down, so using old and new, or old and the new way of representing these. So the BB on the left represents the non-mutated wild type blue gene, and on the right hand side we can see the two crosses, which is the non-mutated wild type Yellowface mutation. So we've got BB, and then we've got the two crosses, which equals the wild type green. In the normal blue, the blue that we normally talk about as being a normal blue, we get a non-mutated blue gene and the mutated blue gene, giving us a green split for blue, and the same goes for the Yellowface mutation. And you know, and then we get the BL1 mutation and the Yellowface 1 Yellowface 1 mutation, both producing what appears to be a normal blue, and the two are indistinguishable for them, and certainly to my eyes they are indistinguishable from each other. So the question therefore is, why do we consider the Yellowface Mutant 1 as being a yellowface and not a normal blue? Well, like I said, it goes back to those very early days when those early breeders didn't understand how the Yellowface Mutant 1 was being produced. So of course, when it appeared in people's sheds, they assumed it was a true yellowface and lumped it in with the Yellowface varieties. Imagine now, I'll go back to the previous slide, but imagine now that the Yellowface Mutant 1 mutation appeared before what we now consider to be the normal blue. There would have been no Yellowface variety produced, so therefore we would have considered this to be the normal blue, and when the normal blue, what we currently consider to be the normal blue, appeared and the Yellowface turned up, then we would have considered it to be the Yellowface variety. You know, the mutations don't have to appear in any particular order, so they could have appeared differently. So from that point of view, I will, like many other people, consider that the Mutant 1 is in fact just a different way of producing the normal blue, and as such I will from this point on refer to it as BL2. So we've got BL1, the normal blue, the first appearance of the normal blue, and BL2, which is the second appearance, or the Yellowface Mutant 1 appearance. So how do we actually get the Yellowface Mutant 1 then? Well, it's generally accepted now. I think this is one of those ones that's less controversial than others, but it's generally accepted that both the BL1 and BL2, Yellowface Mutant 1, are allele of the blue gene, different allele of the blue gene. And in order to get the Yellowface Mutant 1, you need the BL1 mutation and the BL2 mutation on the same bird. So when you've got those two different mutations of the blue allele on the same bird, the Yellowface Mutant 1 will appear. And so you can see where the confusion came in. It required the two of them to appear on the same bird back in the 1930s. Suddenly the yellowface turned up. It was difficult to distinguish between the two blue types. We hadn't done the breeding experiments that we've now done to identify that it was just a different allele of the blue gene. We'll begin now to look at the blue gene hierarchical notation as we did before the dilute gene. So we've got the non-mutated blue, which is the dominant variety, and then we've got BL1 and BL2, which are both recessive to the non-mutated gene. So you'll both get splits for green if those appear with the non-mutated gene. But the BL1 and BL2 mutations are co-dominant to each other. So when they appear on the same bird, they produce a bird that's different from either of them, and actually it's the Yellowface Mutant 1 variety that is produced. I hope that makes sense. So you can see here why I would consider it not to be, not to call it a Yellowface allele, but actually BL2, in the same way as we treat the two dilutes slightly different. So that's the Yellowface Mutant 1. What about the other varieties? Well, there we go. That's covered the Yellowface Mutant 1. I hope you found that interesting and understand why I consider Mutant 1 to be a recessive variety and part of the overall blue gene family. In part 8b, we will look at the Yellowface Mutant 2 and Goldenface varieties, which we saw in this video have a slightly different way of being produced to that of the Mutant 1, and perhaps even more a little bit controversial in terms of the dominant recessive discussion around those particular two mutations. But that will be covered in part 8b. As always, if you enjoy the videos, don't forget to hit the like button. Please do subscribe and of course comment. And I would ask in this case, if you are going to comment on anything discussed in this video that you disagree with, please do leave, if possible, some links to where you're getting that information from, so that I can, of course, review it and perhaps feedback. So there we are, part 8A completed.